Chapter 50 of The Seventh Most Important Thing by Shelley Pearsall. There were 5 people in the group, 2 women and 3 men. They came on a Saturday in 2 taxis. Arthur wished Squeak could have been there, but one of his cousins was getting married, so Arthur was on his own. He didn't like being on his own. He liked it even less when he saw the group. They looked as if they had come straight from a country club. Even though it was a warm June day, the men were wearing suit coats and bow ties. The 2 women had on stylish dresses and high heels. They didn't seem very happy about having to walk through the trash-strewn gravel to the garage in their good shoes, either. Arthur tried to be polite, holding the door open and saying hello to everyone, but it didn't seem to matter much. Once the 5 people got through the doorway, they ignored him completely and headed straight for Mr. Hampton's creation. They gathered in a tight knot in front of it, talking among themselves. Arthur couldn't tell if they liked it or not because he couldn't hear much of what was being said, but he was kind of shocked when one of the women walked up to a silver table on the display and pulled it forward without even asking for permission. Then she started tapping a couple of the foil-covered light bulbs with her painted fingernails and running her hands along the decorated sides. She even kneeled down to look underneath the table. "It's a discarded bedside table from the 20s or 30s, she said to the rest of the group. "Decorated with cardboard scraps, light bulbs, and maybe some foil-covered ping-pong balls here and there. Looks like everything is held together with strips of metal cans, straight pins, and glue." Ping-pong balls? Arthur shook his head. None of the 7 most important things were ping-pong balls. They were crumpled balls of foil. If anybody had bothered to ask him, he could have told the group exactly what they were. He'd made some of them himself. "But is it art?" one of the men asked. He was an older guy with a thick white hair who kind of looked like Albert Einstein. "I'm having a hard time seeing the artistic value in this piece, other than the fact that it is an elaborate example of how discarded odds and ends can be transformed into a religious display." Arthur finally spoke up, because the museum people clearly had no clue what they were looking at, and he couldn't stand listening to them any longer. "It's called the Throne of the Third Heaven," he announced from the garage doorway. "That's what it's supposed to be." All eyes turned toward Arthur as if noticing him for the first time. Arthur Owens didn't really want to go on, but he decided to show off the piece Hampton had made in the war, since it was one of his favorites. He picked up the fragile box created of broken things and tried to remember all the details about it. The island, the war, Hampton's visions. The number 3. "Mr. Hampton said this is supposed to be death and war turned into something beautiful," he explained. "I like that idea," said the second woman in the group. She took off her fancy rhinestone eyeglasses and leaned closer to study the elaborate box. "Death and war turned into something beautiful." Arthur walked around and pointed out some of the other symbols on the tables and pedestals, the angel wings, the stars, the crowns, the lights in the darkness, light bulbs. The same woman who had liked the box said she thought it was very interesting that Mr. Hampton covered every object in his collection with foil. "Reflects the viewer," someone else replied. "So what the artist could have been saying is that heaven is supposed to reflect us, the viewers," another voice added. This bizarre idea had never occurred to Arthur. Had Mr. Hampton really wanted his masterpiece to reflect the people looking at it? Was that why everything had to shine? He glanced at the group behind him with more interest. Maybe they did know something after all. Mr. Hampton called the foil and some of the other things he used the 7 most important things, he added in case that might help to explain more. For some reason, the group found this funny. "I have no clue why he used 7 for everything, but that's what he did," Arthur finished quickly, embarrassed by the laughter. "I can tell you why," the man with Einstein hair said. The rest of the group nodded as if they knew the reason, too. "Traditionally, 7 is the number of completeness and perfection. 7 days of the week, 7 days of creation in the Bible, and so on." 7. The number of completeness and perfection. That was when the puzzle pieces finally started to fall into place for Arthur. Mr. Hampton had wanted him to find 7 things to complete the project. The building blocks he'd called them, but Arthur had also suspected they were the building blocks of his redemption, too, the 7 things he needed to find for himself, for his life. "Is that all?" the woman with the rhinestone glasses asked Arthur. Looking up, Arthur realized he'd completely lost track of what he'd been saying. The whole group was staring at him, wondering what the heck was going on, wondering why the kid had suddenly lost it and stopped talking. "Yeah," he mumbled, still feeling kind of dazed, still thinking of the 7 things. "I think that's all I know." "So have we seen enough?" the white-haired guy asked the other 4 people, who nodded. "We'll let you know what we've decided once we've had time to talk it over with the board," the man continued. Arthur had no idea what board the museum guy meant, but he nodded anyhow, as if the plan was fine with him. He wasn't really sure if he was allowed to agree with anything. Hampton's throne didn't even belong to him. The entire visit only lasted about 30 minutes. Then everybody made their way across the uneven gravel again. As Arthur watched the taxis back up and leave, he hoped he'd said the right things. He hoped Mr. Hampton would have approved.